Stop scrolling. What? Oh. Right. It seems like maybe I'm expected to take my time here. Alright, how do I beat around the bush about this? The US government is using xenophobic rhetoric about TikTok to push a bill that would remove important limitations placed on economic legislation, giving the president unconstitutional powers to abridge freedoms of speech, association, and the press based on nationality. What? Come on, I don't know how to do it any slower than that. Hi, I'm TX Watson. I want to tell you about why President Biden's proposed TikTok ban is stupid. I'm a professional TikToker. Making little educational videos over there has been my full-time job since September 2020. I've also been a researcher and administrator for the Online Creators Association, a labor rights group for content creators, in which capacity I gave a talk on TikTok's moderation policy at ASU's Lincoln Center for Applied Ethics, and presented a research proposal about TikTok at the International Communication Association's annual conference last summer in Paris. If it sounds like I have a conflict of interest here, I do. I have an interest in this video being very successful, because I'm pretty sure my job is about to get banned, and I don't want to have to go back to doing what I was doing before this, which was feeding live puppies to angry tech billionaires. So please like, subscribe, and share this video. For the puppies. President Joe Biden announced on Thursday, March 16th, his intention to ban TikTok unless it were sold by its Chinese parent company, ByteDance.
But President Biden doesn't have the ability to do that. No part of the executive branch does. Among other things, it would be a violation of the First Amendment. However, the White House has announced support of a bill which would ban TikTok, and the method by which it aims to give the president the ability to ban TikTok is by overturning portions of the IEEPA, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The IEEPA gives the president the ability to restrict commerce in situations of international emergency. It was originally implemented in 1977 under the Carter administration to give the president the power to ban commerce between the United States and Iran. However, in the 1980s, Congress passed the Berman Amendment, which limits the powers of the IEEPA so that it can't be used to violate the First Amendment, particularly as it relates to freedom of speech, press, and association. If this bill passes, it will create exceptions in the Berman Amendment, which will limit Americans' abilities to do basic things like send emails to other countries or watch foreign movies from them.
Who are you?
Right. I'm Elli Peacock. I produce content as the Eclectic Library on both TikTok and Twitch. I've also spent the last 3 years working at tech startups, notably one of which specialized in cybersecurity.
Biden proposes to use emergency economic powers to demand that American individuals and companies not do business with individuals and companies in certain other countries that the US government characterizes as hostile. TikTok is an American company. It is owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company, and being owned is doing business. Of the two bills on this topic before Congress, one in the House and one in the Senate one is much scarier, but the House one is the only one that makes an attempt to justify itself in the text. The bill argues that taking action against TikTok specifically is necessary, and it lays out 4 points in defense of that argument. First, that the director of the FBI said that ByteDance is controlled by the Chinese government, which gives them the potential to leverage the app to control the recommendation engine influencing what Americans see, to access American user data, and to control cell phones on which it's installed. Second, the director of national intelligence says that China is developing frameworks for collecting and using foreign data. Third, the director of Central Intelligence said that because TikTok is a Chinese company, the Chinese government can insist on extracting user data from TikTok and can shape the content that goes out to American users of the app. Fourth, Congress already passed a bill banning TikTok on government phones. The first one's just an incorrect version of the third, mischaracterizing ByteDance as controlled by the Chinese government rather than under its jurisdiction. So we're going to roll those two into one and loop back around because the other two are going to be quick. The second is just an attempt to imply a point that the US government doesn't actually have evidence for. It is true that China, like every other major country, has an intelligence apparatus. It's frankly an obvious and mundane statement. China invests in its intelligence operations. Giving that as an answer to the question, should we be worried about TikTok, implies without saying that TikTok is an extension of the Chinese intelligence apparatus. But if the US government had evidence for that, they'd say so. Even if they weren't saying what the evidence was, they'd be saying, we have reason to believe, not it is possible for us to imagine. The fourth, that Congress has already banned TikTok on government phones. Hang on. Ellie?
Government devices shouldn't have unnecessary apps on them, and it's not uncommon for there to be restrictions on the sorts of apps that are allowed on federal phones or phones that were provided with federal funds. Just like any company, the federal government is well within its rights to set expectations about what sorts of websites and applications are accessible on their devices. I mean, heck, I know back in 2010, the CDC didn't even allow access to Gmail on their computers. And there are tons of other social media apps that don't have a place on government phones either. Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr. None of those apps make sense to have on a government phone unless it's the phone for a marketing person. Also, government phones doesn't mean phones owned by government employees. It just means phones owned by the government. Government employees, including senators, can still have TikTok on their personal devices.
Listen, TikTok is an American company. It used to be Chinese, it used to be Musical.ly, which was launched simultaneously in America and China before being acquired by ByteDance and then killed in China in favor of the ByteDance app Douyin. Musical.ly, now renamed TikTok, has welcomed federal investigation into the possibility of inappropriate foreign access to American user data, legally isolated itself so that no part of it exists within Chinese jurisdiction, and initiated Project Texas, a systematic overhaul of TikTok's internal software structure to eliminate avenues of access to private data on TikTok from ByteDance. And listen, last June, BuzzFeed published an expose claiming to prove that ByteDance employees had access to American user data. The article's main evidence was recordings off of meetings from Project Texas. The quotes about the existence of the security holes was from the meetings about how to close them. In terms of the facts of the article, BuzzFeed provided a thorough defense of TikTok's integrity and commitment to their promise to close those holes. In tone, though, the article was written with open hostility and aggressive bad faith, and it is the standard citation on how untrustworthy TikTok is as a company. Looping back to the one argument the state makes that is actually about TikTok, not China having a government or Congress having a phobia, can the Chinese government compel TikTok to hand over US user data? Can they compel TikTok to modify the algorithm or insert and promote content to serve Chinese interests? Can they access and control American devices that have TikTok installed? In short, no.
It's a bit more complicated than that, but you're not wrong. For starters, TikTok is legally separated from ByteDance. It's an American company, and therefore is not compellable by China's national intelligence law, the NIL.
As I understand it, it's not just on the level of companies. Any Chinese citizen is subject to the NIL.
Sure, but one, the CEO of TikTok is a Singaporean, and two, all new US data is handled by a subsidiary that employs exclusively American citizens for this express purpose. Also, on March 23rd, TikTok's CEO informed Congress that all of the data that was previously stored on American and Singaporean servers is in the process of being deleted, so the only existing copies will be those held by the subsidiary. But let's say, worst case scenario, the Chinese government does decide to invoke the national intelligence law and asks ByteDance to try to pressure TikTok into giving over user data. The worst ByteDance can do is issue votes of no confidence for the board members, which as a method of manipulating TikTok's internals is very slow, highly indirect, and extremely visible.
What is the data that the Chinese government could get about American users of TikTok if they had access to TikTok's user data?
The only sensitive personal information that TikTok has are direct messages sent within the app, and 1099s for the fraction of creators that TikTok actually pays. Frankly, if the Chinese government wanted to get their hands on US user data, it would be way more efficient to just buy the data that Facebook sells to data brokers, which is totally legal for them to do, by the way.
So, has the Chinese government already bought US user data from Facebook?
Probably.
Cool. What about controlling the national discourse by manipulating the algorithm? First of all, TikTok is the only major social media platform that doesn't straight up permit the purchase of political advertising, by which vector it's already ahead of every other major platform as a potential vector for Chinese propaganda. But if China wanted to use the algorithm to influence American political discourse, well, I mean, it's been done. Russia did it with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, and Tumblr in the 2016 and 2020 election cycles, which sorta undermines the argument that TikTok's uniquely vulnerable to foreign power, doesn't it? The thing about propaganda is that if it's not good content, it'll be more effective in damaging the integrity of the app than promoting a political agenda, so artificially promoting it would be counterproductive. And if it is good content, then the ability to artificially promote it within the app is relatively trivial. And just to be clear, Chinese intelligence law does not permit the Chinese government to force the publication or promotion of particular messages through publishers within their jurisdiction. They could do that, but so could Canada, so could France, so could America. Major governments can do whatever they want if we include among the options breaking their own laws. But if the argument is it's bad because Chinese people work at TikTok, that's not national security. That's just racism. Finally, can they turn TikTok into spyware and infect everyone's phones? I mean, like, yeah, in the same way that anyone on the road can just decide to swerve into you one day instead of going to work. We have this tendency, when we want to justify being afraid of something, to pretend that the only interest of other people involved is to hurt us. Turning TikTok into spyware would get it uninstalled everywhere, cause an international incident not just between China and America, but China and everywhere else. Destroy a multi-billion-dollar corporate asset and get caught and thrown out by the virus protection of, like, most phones. Hundreds of people are capable of fucking your whole life up in thousands of ways every day. They aren't doing it because their interests, even when they conflict with yours, aren't just anti-you. People have their own shit going on. Nobody's trying to break their spines to give you whiplash and a repair bill, and China is not trying to destroy multi-billion-dollar corporate assets to destroy a few thousand American phones. So we've been working on this for like a week now. We started last Thursday and we thought we were going to get it done in one day.
But we just kept finding more stuff. At first, we both thought that these bills were only targeting TikTok, but the Senate bill, which is actually getting traction, has a way bigger scope than that.
Yeah, it like basically overturns the First Amendment with regard to interaction with any country that the government decides now or later.
Also, the government decides. The Senate bill aims to provide the power to a single appointed official.
Yeah, the Secretary of Commerce.
Yeah, who would get the sole and unreviewable power to add foreign adversaries to this list.
Sole and unreviewable is text from the bill, by the way.
So if you like having basic protections for your First Amendments, please call your senators.
We're putting some information up on screen right now. If your senator is one of these people, call them up and let them know they're lining up to lose your vote forever. But even if that's not one of your people, even if your senator is on the right side of this, call all of your Congress people. If you can't do phones, send emails. Or if you're up for it, write letters. They take letters weirdly seriously. Politicians do a lot of complicated math in their heads about every decision they make. We need them to know that this is not one of the ones that they can use as a bargaining chip to win points for something else they care about. We need them to know that this is an issue they can't be wrong on.
And talk about this with your friends, with your loved ones, with your neighbors. This isn't just a TikTok ban. This is a dramatic expansion of executive powers and an intentional violation of First Amendment rights.
They're making this about TikTok because the idea of caring about banning the dancing app is silly. They're counting on you thinking this is stupid. The names you're about to see rolling by on screen are my Patreon supporters. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can do so at txwatson.com/Patreon. I'm out of a job soon, probably, so I could really use your support. If you only take away one call to action from this video, do the senators thing, but if you can take two, back me on Patreon.
Alrighty.